just a little bit. So my family, we were in Washington, D.C. last week, and I wanted to bring you great news of glad tidings. I have solved all of our political issues. It took me a week, okay, so I understand, but I basically I spent a week there with my family and realized that there is no way any good can come out of a place that's that dreary and gloomy and cold. So I issued a blanket invitation to move the federal government to Texas. I'll let you know what they say. Yeah, some of you are grumbling about that one, right? Huh? See, I thought I had a good answer to this thing. So we did. We spent the week of Thanksgiving in D.C. with my daughter and my son-in-law in kind of their place, and we got to tour around and see the monuments. If you've never been, there's something so majestic about the things that are in D.C., these monuments and these museums, and perhaps my favorite is still the Lincoln. It's just unbelievable to stand at the feet of that thing and then even read some of the things he said. You're going to hear me bring this up in the future, I guarantee it, because I love some of the words and the things he said in the days of old, if you will, in the foundation of this country. But there's something beautiful in that place. But at the same time, it's no secret we have issues, right? The country is sick in some ways, and even at the levels of politics and policy that happen in our country, there's some incredibly toxic things. And I was thinking about D.C. as I was there this week, and then I was thinking about Dallas. And Dallas, to me, is a beautiful city. I didn't come here in '91 thinking it was a beautiful city. I didn't even think it was a place to stay, right? I was here to go to seminary and then hightail it back to the hill country where all of God's people have settled, right, south of here. Yeah, I throw that in for the family. But there's this thing about Dallas that it grows on you. We have incredible structures, and the way the city is growing in some of our new bridges, in the buildings, and the way we're illuminating the buildings. Dallas is growing into what I think is a really beautiful city. There's so much ingenuity, so much creativity happening in Dallas. The people are so incredibly intelligent, and it's a fun place to be, right? But it's not without its problems as well. Back in 1930, we built on the west side of Dallas a smelting plant. If you don't know what a smelting plant is, it's a place where they will render down old batteries and things to pull the lead out so it can be used for other things. And it was built back in the 30s in a quaint little neighborhood over on the west side of Dallas. It was built at a time where we really didn't understand the dangers of lead and lead poisoning. And it would be decades before we ever started measuring that kind of stuff. By the time we started measuring the lead content of this neighborhood in West Dallas, it was hundreds of times off the scale of what it should have been. The neighborhood was sick in this beautiful city, this growing city. And it would take a few more years. About 1984, I think, is the year they finally shut the smelting plant down. And now we're left in a beautiful city. We're left with remnants of incredible toxicity. You go to this neighborhood and you're going to hear the stories of low IQ, incredibly tough performance issues, behavioral issues, all signs of high levels of lead in a person's system, and then chronic disease. It's sad, it's hard, that in such a beautiful place, we're reminded that just like the world we live in, that this world, while it's beautiful, has some toxicity in it, right? It's toxic at times. So you can admire the beaches, which is where I like to spend my time, or you can admire the mountains, which is where some of you like to spend your time, or maybe you like to sit out at night and look at the stars because they're bigger and brighter in Texas, right? And or whatever it is that you like, maybe you just like fishing a stream somewhere. There's all of this beauty in this world, but there's this toxicity that exists as well, this thing that we can't get away from, this sickness that's deep in our soul, right? This toxic thing exists in the middle of so much beauty. We're in this series of James. We're closing it out today. And James has been asking this one question. Put it up on the screen. What difference does faith make in our lives? And we've kind of come to this place, at least I hope you have. I don't know where your faith journey is, everybody in here, but at least I hope you're at this place where you're starting to understand that faith is not just important, and it's not this thing that we say when we don't know what else to say, right? That, oh, just have faith because I don't have another answer, right? It's not this passive, lighthearted statement. That faith is real and it's gritty and it takes effort. And faith will work when you put your faith to work. And it will make a difference. But if we don't put it to work, it won't do anything for us. So we're closing out this series, and James is about to go on a rant. And I love James chapter 5, but I'm only going to spend time this morning on the first 6 verses. We just didn't have time. So I'm going to entrust you with the rest of the chapter. Go home this week, read it more, dig into it, right? You can do that. God will speak to you. But I want to focus on those first 6 verses because he's about to go off on a rant that really is kind of an uncomfortable rant, I think, for not just me, but for us in this area, because he's about to talk about a toxicity that exists in our soul that will kill us if we're not careful. James 5, let's start with verse 1. Come now, you rich. Now, I'm going to stop right there, because I know you guys, if you're like me, you read things and you automatically find loopholes, right? You know what a loophole is, right? Surely you know what a loophole is. This is where you're going to let yourself off the hook because this can't be for me. See, James just started out. He says, come now, you rich. And, that's not me. I'm not rich. There's no way this applies to me. So I've got to stop. And I want to talk to you about whether or not you're rich. Okay? It's about to get even more uncomfortable. I don't want you, listen, because here's what we do. We excuse a lot of things in our lives. And we think, oh, I don't want to be like my parents, but yet we keep repeating some of the same mistakes. I don't want to be like that mom who's in my kid's class, right? But we repeat some mistakes. We let ourselves off the hook. We can't do that when it comes to this passage, and I want to show you why. First, if you think you're not rich, the 2017 U.S. Census Bureau, right? You hate that thing? Came up with this, that the average salary in this country is over $56,000. The average. Now, right now, somebody's saying, oh, wait a minute, because see, I'm not even average, so I'm not rich. Well, here's the problem. If you earn $25,000, don't think about the U.S., think about the whole world. If you earn $25,000, you're making 123% of the world's average salary. With $25,000, you're making more than the rest of the world is making. Right? So you probably, when I first read that verse, you probably thought, oh, I know who's rich, and it's not me. You had somebody else in mind. Can I tell you something right now? The whole world has us in mind. We are wealthy. 123% of the average salary is what you will make if you're just making $25,000. In fact, it puts you in, are you ready for this? It puts you in 2% of the world's population for earnings, the top 2%. To be considered part of the global elite, you only have to make $34,000 a year. And you are now considered part of the global elite. If you're making 25, you're making 8 times what a teacher in Ethiopia is going to make. And we all know teachers need more money, right? Even in our culture. But think about 8 times at $25,000. A teacher in Ethiopia is going to make 1/8 of that. And I guarantee you, her kids act just like our kids, okay? So she's stressed out too. Half of the world's richest people live in the U.S. So when James says and starts with this plea for the wealthy to listen, we need to understand it's all of us, okay? We don't have a pass this morning. We don't get a pass because we think, oh, I'm not rich. I understand you may have debt. I understand things may be breathing down your neck. You're not meeting your bills. I get it. And I think probably every one of us in this room has been there. We may be there again. It's just the reality is from a global standard, everybody's looking at us. And so we need to be very careful with James's words. I want to also, though, remove one more barrier for you this morning because we're already into this and he's going to talk about money, right? So everybody's starting to tighten up and it's the Christmas season and why is Cecil bringing this up? I didn't bring it up. James did. Blame him. And if you're perhaps a skeptic this morning, like you haven't even made a decision about Jesus Christ, I need to say this. Don't worry, I'm not asking you for money, right? Just put your checkbook away. That's not what this is about. If you consider Journey your church home, don't worry. I'm not asking for money. But if journey is where you grow with God, if journey is where you serve, if journey is where you've said, I'm going to walk with God and these people, if that's how you've affiliated with journey, you need to understand that God may say something different than I say, right? You may have to correct your giving. You may have to correct your finances altogether. But the first point is to listen, right? Is to listen. And I don't care where you fell on that spectrum that I just laid out. Here's the problem. We live in North Dallas, and the money conversation is incredibly tough, and most of us let ourselves off the hook too easily, all right? So if that's not enough, let's go back to what James is saying now in chapter 1. He's addressing everybody. In chapter 5, verse 1, he says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire." Great description, right? He says there's this misery that's coming your way. Pay attention. Misery's coming your way, and the reason it's coming your way is because you've put all this trust, all this confidence in money. Now, we've said it for years, right? There's no doubt that money is power. With money comes the ability to have. With money comes the ability to have things and establish yourself. With money comes the ability to control environments and systems and companies. So there is power in money. But the problem is, James is saying, look, for us individually right now, here's part of the problem is that we are putting our faith, we're putting our trust, we're putting our confidence in this stuff that we think is going to take care of us. But in the end, it's going to rot. And when it rots, look what he says. It's going to be evidence against you. As things rot, it's evidence against you. I have a house full of evidence right now. I get this spot on the side of my house where the board's kind of rotting a little bit between two windows, and it's evidence that my stuff is rotting. And you know what? It's just more evidence that I got to work harder to maintain the thing. But the problem is I put all this confidence in my house, right? That it's gonna grow in value. It's gonna be this investment for me. And James says, you need to stop that. This is where I say happy Thanksgiving. Aren't you glad you came here? This is such a happy message, right? He's trying to warn us, right? He's not trying to be a downer. He's saying this evidence is going to be against you. So here's what he's saying. Money is dangerous. Money's dangerous. Why? Because it gives us power. And with that power, we collect stuff, and that stuff becomes the focus of our lives. It becomes more important than the things around us. Our affections get attached to the money, right? All of a sudden, we start believing the claims that money can satisfy my deepest longings. James says, listen, in the end, it's going to be evidence. It's going to rot your soul. It is going to destroy you. A couple of weeks ago, we went out to East Texas, where most of you know in August, my grandfather passed. Now, granted, he was 94 years old. He had lived a very long, incredible life, but we loaded the last of his stuff on a trailer. A little 6x8 trailer, and my wife and I commented as we pulled away, that's harsh. That's harsh to take a man's life and then be able to just put it on a little 6x8 trailer and pull some stuff away. And we learned something, though, that was kind of humorous about my grandfather. We learned a little bit about his personality as my parents and all were having to clean out his home. We learned that if one thing was good with Grandpa, apparently two were better. So like I have two circular saws now, or two just two drills, or it's just like if one was good, two might be better. Grandpa was a pretty simple man. I'm not sure he put his confidence in those things, but it just gave me pause to think about how much is your life going to be worth? How much at the end of your life is it going to, are people going to pull up and load up the last bit of stuff and look at that stuff and what will they think about your life, right? There's so much irony in this thing. Why do we do this? There's research that makes some pretty harsh claims. The newest research says that around 1970, every one of us, if you were alive, some of you were not. I understand you missed the good days. But if you were alive around 1970, here's what happened. You would have seen every day about 500 ads. In other words, about 500 advertisements would have come across your path. Why? Because TV was growing in popularity, right? Everybody had TVs all of a sudden. And add to that billboards, right? Add to that magazines and newspapers. Man, around this time of year, when you were in the 70s, the Sears catalog came and you took that thing because it had all of the toys that you needed to sift through before the holiday season got there, right? Now we just go to Google everything. But you've got a literal concrete little physical book that had all the toys and pictures, and it looked so happy. But the average person in the 70s would face around 500 ads today. Do you know what it is today? They say in excess of 5,000. Now, there were some who would argue that with the five big media, like movie and news and all this kind of stuff, with the media, that there may be around 400 or 500 still. But the problem is there's more. There's so much excess in our lives. We wrap all of our cars now in media. Our billboards are no longer static. They change. They're like giant TV screens. There are pop-up ads on every one of our social media sites. So the possibility is there that you're going to hit today or tomorrow 5,000 or so ads. And you know what every ad is? Now, if you're in advertising, please, a little caveat. Advertising is not evil, right? It's not a bad thing. But if you are in advertising, what's the goal? To get somebody to buy your product, to get somebody to buy whatever it is you're trying to sell them. There's nothing wrong with that, unless it's 5,000 times a day. Because now my system is overloaded. I'm reminded 5,000 times a day about what I don't have. I'm reminded 5,000 times a day about what you have that I don't have. I'm reminded 5,000 times a day about how unsatisfied I am with my life until I can have what you have. You see, and now all of a sudden our contentment is called into question 5,000 times a day. And my life is lived on this scale of contentment to discontentment, leaning more towards the discontentment side because I'm being bombarded all day long. I'm being told your life's not good enough. You need more stuff. Discontentment is the driving force of our modern world. It just is. Everything is wrapped around answering the question of what do I need next to be happy in life? What's my next step? And we do that all the way down to our relationships, right? If you're single, you may be buying into the ads or any of the advertising that would say, hey, it's better to be married. Or when you get married, go to this place to buy the ring, right? If you're married, maybe you're out of college and you have that first job, maybe it's what about the next job? It's constantly pushing us towards being discontent. And folks, that's toxic. It's toxic for our souls. It's toxic for all of our relationships. It's toxic for our faith. What do you think? Depression and anger, insecurity, and eating disorders are on the rise. We are rotting from the inside out. We are rotting. You say, well, I'm not rotting. I feel pretty good about things. And I'm just saying, hold on. Are you asking the right question? Because I will tell you, even there are spaces in my life where some toxicity still exists. And it's such a chore to be honest about it, right? Because I'm being told that I should be discontent. Look at all this beautiful stuff I could have. When all of that stuff is going to rot. And it's eventually going to come back on me. That's what James is saying. That we keep trying to take the temporary in this world and make it satisfy a soul that was meant for all eternity. And when we do that, what happens? Misery is coming. Money is dangerous. I didn't say it was evil. I said it was dangerous. Go to verse 4. Look what he says next. He says, you've laid up treasures in the last days. I love that. I know we think of treasure, and if you're like me, or maybe I'm weird, I automatically think about Pirates of the Caribbean, and I start chasing that fun storyline in my head. But basically, he's saying, look, whatever it is you're putting your trust in, whatever it is you're being happy with in life, you're doing all of this to have confidence in the last days. In other words, you're storing things up. You're trusting that the house and the investment or the IRA is going to be enough to keep you content through all of life. Our hope is in accruing money. He's saying that's not good for you. He doesn't say don't save, okay? So please don't hear me say that. Please don't go out and empty your savings. He doesn't say don't save. He's just questioning our focus, our hope. Where do we run when times get tough? Do we run to the checkbook to make things better? Some of you might have seen, I caught it early this morning. One of my old favorites, even though he didn't play for the Cowboys, Mike Ditka suffered a heart attack. Mike Ditka is, if you don't know Mike, he's just a big old beast of a man. I mean, he was made to play football. The guy's a big guy. That's all he could do. He was a brilliant coach, and I love to listen to him in his commentary when he's on. He just kind of exemplified to me this big old tough person that could handle life. Like he had made it. He was the top of his field, top of his game. Seemed like he would never age in some ways. But just like my grandfather, we all find out that whatever it is we're really putting our hope and trust and faith in, and I'm not saying that Mike was putting it in his money, I'm just saying that life catches up to you. And all of a sudden, whatever money and fame and fortune you have can't stop the inevitable. Because life will turn toxic at some point, right? And if we're clinging to the things, if we're putting our hope in things that can't save us, then when we get to that point in life, you know what happens? That rot that's in your soul that you've been able to cover up and hide and dress up and put on nice clothes and keep your hair looking just right, that rot starts to come out. And it'll come out in your relationships and your friendships. It's going to come out with the people around you. The way you respond, I was heavily convicted this week because, you're traveling during a holiday week. I don't know if you know this, worst time in the world to travel. And it didn't start off well. We're at the airport and I'm getting dropped off and a policeman gets on his speaker and he starts yelling. And I, after the fact, I guess he was yelling at everybody down this line, but he was yelling right next to me. And I didn't have a great response to him. I did not say Happy Thanksgiving. I questioned why he was yelling at me. To which he told me, it's a PA, sir, I'm yelling at everybody. I said, okay. But that rot, that thing, that when that happens to me, when that happens to you, you know what's happening? That's rot. That's toxicity. That's negative. That's the space in my life where I'm not trusting God because I want to be in control of everything. And if you've got enough money, it gives you even more confidence that you have control of everything and it's going to come out at some point. There's a great old, in the day they would have called it a hymn, I call it a worship song from a pastor back in the 1800s. He wrote these lyrics to deal or confront this idea. Maybe you've heard this. He wrote, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus Christ, my righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name." I love that. I love that it confronts me head on, that it reminds me that all my trust, all my hope, all my confidence really should be in Christ, and that should happen all day, every day. Even when the money's not there, when you wake up in a cold sweat because of what's going on in your life, can you push it off with the confidence that your hope, your faith, your trust doesn't rest in that moment, in that circumstance, no matter how bad it is? James says, you've been trying to lay up treasures here on earth. That's why you're starting to rot. It's funny because I think when James was writing this, I think he remembered a sermon that his brother, by the way, if you didn't know, right? James was the half-brother of Jesus. I think he remembered a sermon that Jesus preached that Matthew recorded in Matthew 6, verse 19. Jesus said on this hillside one day, he says, "Don't lay up treasures for yourself on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy, where thieves can't break in and steal." And then he says one more pointed thing. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So as compelling or condemning as it can be, if I take my checkbook and I open it up and I show you where all of my checks are being written to, you're going to discern the things that are important to me. You're going to discern the things where I put my confidence in faith. And it's a check for all of us, right? Yes, we need money, and yes, we have to have things, and we've got to pay rent, and we've got to put gas in cars. Yes to all of that. My son and I were watching some of the cars drive around DC this week. We were both car freaks. He's a little bit bigger of a car freak than I am, but Porsche is the standard in our house, okay? That's just the car that we both love. And we had this very pointed conversation this week of, but if I had the money, is that where I would put it? Now, if you own a Porsche, that's okay. I'm not telling you to go out and get rid of it. If you do, give it to me. But I'm just saying, you got to ask yourself, James is saying it's about self-examination. God's going after the heart. And the heart is going to be the place where the rot starts to show up. Money can buy some power in this life. It cannot buy you power in the next life. And at some point in time, it's going to rot, and that's why it's dangerous, because it does not deliver what it says it will deliver. Kierkegaard, maybe you've heard Soren Kierkegaard, a philosopher, said this: riches and abundance come hypocritically clad in sheep's clothing, pretending to be security against anxieties, and they become then the object of anxiety. They secure a man against anxieties just about as well as the wolf that is put to tend the sheep. He says, you want to know how good money is about preventing your anxieties? It's about as good as it's going to work out if you put a wolf in the sheep's pen to let him tend them. They aren't going to last. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made this comment. I love Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's a man that stood in his time against incredible atrocities. He said, earthly goods deceive the human heart into believing that they give it security and freedom from worry, but in truth, they are what cause the anxiety. Go back to James 5, verse 4. He says, behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. We start to get a little more insight into what's going on here, that these professing believers, these followers of Christ, you can tell that their confidence is in money because they're cheating people out of money. Verse 5, you've lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You've fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Money is dangerous. Why? James says, because your heart is deceptive. In other words, we let our hearts lie to us all the time. The reasons we keep money back, the way we use money, we have explanations for it, and we trick ourselves. Please, this is not a message where I'm thinking about one person. This is a message where I'm thinking about all of us going, look, we just have to be more honest. We live in one of the wealthiest places. We have this problem, all of us. Yes, you may know somebody else who has it worse. Yes, you may know somebody else who's stingier, who hoards more money, who's bad with their money. They cheat people. But God didn't write this message right now for them. He wrote it for you. They're not here. All we can do is begin to allow God to search our hearts, right? It's not about, don't go out and erase your savings accounts. It's not an argument against savings. It's an argument about what's in control of your heart. And James is begging for self-reflection, some introspection, right? For our hearts to be transformed. Matthew 6, go back for just a second, verse 19, and look what he says. Do not lay up treasures for yourselves, treasures on earth, where moth and rust will destroy them, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves where? Treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. A love of money is deadly because it's going to focus us only on this life. It deceives us. If mankind was created in fact, in the image of a holy God, if we were created by this giant, this creator who outpaces us in every way, and yet we continue to try to serve the creatures that he created around us, the systems and the things that he put around us, it's going to eat at us, and it's not going to fulfill that eternal calling of our lives. Only the gospel is going to deliver that. Let me read you one more lengthy passage that I love from C.S. Lewis, a book of his called Mere Christianity. Some of you have read it. He says, the Christian says, creatures are not born with desire unless satisfaction for those desires exists. So a baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures will satisfy it, that does not prove this universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it. I love that. He said the beautiful stuff in life is only meant to be a picture of the beauty that's coming down the road, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or to be unthankful for those earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy, an echo, or a mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of my life to press on to that country and to help others do the same thing. Money is dangerous, but only the gospel can deliver. Only the gospel. Only that truth that Jesus Christ is the only one who can be trusted with anything in our life, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how bad it may seem to be, regardless of how hard life can get, he can be trusted. And that is the only true truth. So it leaves us with one question. In the middle of the beauty of this season, as the lights start to go up, anybody put their yard lights out yet? Good, you've beat me. Congratulations. As we drive around and we get to see the glittery lights that are coming into the holiday season and the beauty of everything that goes up around us, what do we put our confidence in? What do we put our trust in? Is there something we're not being honest with ourselves about, that we really do trust a growing bank account more than we trust the Savior who died on a cross for us? That's the question. And then the last question, just like it, is, are you ready to surrender? Faith works only when you put faith to work. And so now the question ultimately in the book of James is, are you ready? Are you ready to put faith to work? Will you put it to work? Or does your faith just simply rest in things like attending a weekend service, right? Maybe doing a devotional once every other couple of weeks. Maybe saying a prayer before dinner. If that's all it is, you're going to find yourself in a place where eventually that toxic stuff is going to come out. Because the things you're trusting aren't working. They're not going to work. They have never worked. If we don't learn anything from history, that's what we should learn. When I walk the monuments in D.C., I see it over and over and over. The struggle for peace and the struggle to get along needs to continue. Because when you go to war, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Will you surrender? What do you need to surrender? Is there something that needs to change in your bank account, in the way you do money? James says, let it change. Let your heart be transformed. Put your faith and confidence and trust in Jesus Christ and begin to walk that way. Try that. You're going to find it transforms everything about your life. Let me pray for us.